December 4th, 1991. 1:43 a.m., Miami International Airport. Pan Am Flight 436 touches down from Barbados. The passengers deplane. The crew walks off. The lights in the terminal go dark, and just like that, the most iconic airline in history ceases to exist. No final speech, no farewell tour, no ceremony, just silence. 22 years earlier, this same airline was untouchable. They flew to 86 countries, operated 150 jets, employed 35,000 people, generated $1.1 billion in revenue and $87 million in profit. Their logo, a blue globe, was recognized in every corner of the world. Presidents flew Pan Am. Movie stars flew Pan Am. If you wanted to see the world, you flew Pan Am. They were so confident in their dominance that in 1968, they started taking reservations for commercial flights to the moon. The moon! NASA hadn't even landed there yet, but Pan Am was selling tickets. Over 93,000 people signed up. Ronald Reagan had a reservation. So did Walter Cronkite. A couple in Austria put their newborn baby on the list, hoping he'd be the youngest person to walk on the lunar surface. Pan Am didn't have a spacecraft. They didn't have a launch pad. They didn't even have a plan. But nobody doubted them. Because for 40 years, Pan Am had done the impossible. They flew the first international route out of America, the first flight across the Pacific, the first around the world, the first transatlantic jet service. They didn't just fly planes, they built airports in jungles, turned uninhabited islands into refueling stations, and created routes where none existed. If Pan Am said they'd fly you to the moon, you believed them. So how does an airline this powerful, this beloved, this seemingly indestructible just disappear? How do you go from selling tickets to the moon to ceasing operations in the middle of the night? This is the story of Pan American World Airways. The rise, the empire, the mistakes, and the collapse that nobody saw coming. Juan Terry Tripp was born into wealth, educated at Yale and connected to power through skull and bones. In 1927, at 28 years old, he had already failed twice at running airlines. Most people would have quit. Tripp saw an opportunity. He'd learned something his competitors hadn't. In 1920s America, passenger airlines were a fantasy. Nobody was making money flying people around, but airmail, that was pure profit. The US government paid guaranteed contracts to carry mail, and whoever controlled those contracts controlled aviation's future. In 1927, the government announced the first international airmail route, Key West to Havana, 90 miles. 3 companies competed for it. Tripp wasn't one of them. He lost the bid. So he bought both companies that beat him, merged them with his own, and on October 28, 1927, flew Pan Am's first flight. A single-engine Fokker, 1 passenger, 1 hour, 10 minutes, Key West to Havana. But Cuba was never the goal. Tripp wanted the world. Within 12 months, Pan Am dominated the Caribbean and Central America. But Tripp didn't just fly routes, he locked them down. He negotiated exclusive landing rights with foreign governments. Want to fly to Havana? Pan Am. Mexico City? Panama? There was no alternative. Tripp had built monopolies in every direction. By 1929, Pan Am flew Miami to Buenos Aires. 9,000 miles, 9 days, 17 countries. While America collapsed into the Great Depression, Pan Am expanded. They had 63 aircraft and 1,200 employees. And they had something no competitor could touch: $2 million a year in guaranteed government airmail revenue. Passengers were optional. The checks kept coming regardless. Then Tripp looked at a map and decided to do something insane. He wanted to fly across the Pacific Ocean. In 1931, this wasn't ambitious, it was suicidal. San Francisco to Tokyo, 5,000 miles of open water. No aircraft had that range, no airports existed between California and Asia. No navigation systems, no weather forecasting, just 5,000 miles of nothing. Tripp went to aircraft manufacturers with a simple demand: build me a plane that can carry 30 passengers, fly 3,000 miles without refueling, and land on water. They told him it was impossible. He told them he'd buy it if they built it. In 1935, Martin Aircraft delivered the M130. They called it the China Clipper. It was the largest aircraft ever built. 32 passengers, 3,200-mile range, $417,000 per plane. That's $9 million today. But there was still a problem. The China Clipper could fly 3,200 miles. San Francisco to Tokyo was 5,000. Even with this miracle aircraft, they'd run out of fuel and crash into the ocean. Trippi's solution was characteristically extreme. If there are no airports in the Pacific, build them. Pan Am constructed entire airports on Midway Island, Wake Island, and Guam. These weren't cities, they were rocks. Midway was an uninhabited coral atoll with no fresh water. Pan Am built a runway, a hotel, a power plant, and a weather station from nothing. They shipped concrete, steel, lumber, workers, and supplies across thousands of miles of ocean. They turned barren islands into functioning airports because Trippa needed fuel stops and nobody else was going to build them. November 22nd, 1935. The China Clipper lifted off from San Francisco Bay carrying 110,000 pieces of mail. 6 days later, after stops in Honolulu, Midway, Wake, and Guam, it landed in Manila. 8,000 miles, 59 hours of flight time. The impossible route was now a regular schedule. Passenger tickets cost $1,438 round trip, $31,000 in today's money. Only the ultra-wealthy could afford it. But that didn't matter. Pan Am had proven it could cross the Pacific. They'd connected two continents separated by the largest ocean on Earth. The route was open, the world was smaller. 4 years later, Trippa did it again. This time, the Atlantic. May 20th, 1939. Pan Am Flight 101 departed New York for Marseille in a Boeing 314 flying boat. The largest aircraft ever built. 74 passengers, 24 hours. Stops in the Azores and Lisbon. Round-trip fare, $675 or $14,500 today. But calling the Boeing 314 an aircraft undersells what it was. This wasn't transportation, it was a flying palace. Sleeping berths with real beds, a dining room with white tablecloths, china, and silverware. 5-course meals prepared by onboard chefs. A ladies' powder room. A men's smoking lounge. A honeymoon suite. Passengers wore evening gowns and tuxedos to dinner. Champagne flowed freely. There was no economy class. There was no business class. There was one class, and it was the most luxurious way any human being had ever traveled. By 1940, Pan Am flew to 47 countries on 5 continents with 80 aircraft. But more importantly, they had something no competitor could replicate: a government-sanctioned monopoly on international travel. The U.S. government had essentially crowned Pan Am as America's flag carrier. If you were American and wanted to leave the country by air, you flew Pan Am. There was no other option. Then December 7th, 1941 happened. Pearl Harbor. America entered World War II, and Pan Am became a military asset. The U.S. government needed everything Pan Am had built: their routes, their aircraft, their airports, their pilots, their mechanics, their infrastructure across 6 continents. Pan Am didn't just support the war effort, they became essential to it. Over 4 years, Pan Am trained 10,000 military pilots. They flew 90 million miles of military cargo and personnel transport. They built 50 airports in Latin America and Africa where none had existed. The government paid them $250 million, about $4 billion today. By the time World War II ended in 1945, Pan Am wasn't just an airline anymore. They were a strategic instrument of American power. They had routes everywhere, airports everywhere, infrastructure everywhere. And they had positioned themselves perfectly for the next revolution: jets. Juan Trepe had spent 20 years building an empire. Now he was about to bet everything on making it even bigger. Boeing unveils the 707. the first jet that could actually turn a profit. 150 passengers, 600 miles per hour. In a single moment, every propeller plane on Earth became a museum piece. Juan Trippe understood this instantly, but so did his competition. American Airlines placed orders. TWA placed orders. United placed orders. For the first time in Pan Am's 30-year history, Trippe faced a level playing field. Everyone would get jets simultaneously. He couldn't accept that. Trippe ordered 45 jets. Not 5, not 10. 45, 20 Boeing 707s, 25 Douglas DC-8s. Cost $269 million. In today's money, that's $3 billion. It wasn't just the largest aircraft order in aviation history, it was larger than the next 10 orders combined. He wasn't testing the market, he wasn't being cautious, he was declaring war. The message was clear. Whoever had the most jets would own the sky, and Pan Am would have more than everyone else. October 26, 1958. Pan Am Flight 101 lifts off from New York, bound for Paris, the first scheduled transatlantic jet service in history. 111 passengers, 8 hours, 41 minutes, half the time of any propeller aircraft. Everything changed, not gradually, overnight. In 1958, ocean liners still ruled transatlantic travel. More people crossed the Atlantic by ship than by plane. 7 years later, 95% flew. 7 years. The ocean liner industry didn't adapt or downsize, it ceased to exist. Cunard Line, White Star Line, French Line, companies that had printed money. For generations went bankrupt or desperately converted luxury liners into Caribbean cruise ships. Pan Am's jets didn't compete with them, they erased them. Pan Am's growth became exponential. 1960, 160 cities in 86 countries. 1965, 150 aircraft, 35,000 employees. 1968, $1 billion in annual revenue, $1.5 billion market value. Pan Am wasn't just the largest international airline. They were larger than the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth largest airlines combined. They dominated global aviation the way Standard Oil had dominated petroleum. There was Pan Am, and there was everyone else. Juan Trippe should have been satisfied. 61 years old, wealthiest airline executive in history, unquestioned leader of global aviation. He wanted more. Trippe calls William Allen, Boeing's president. He has an idea. He wants an aircraft that can carry 400 passengers across the Atlantic nonstop. 400 passengers. The largest commercial aircraft in existence carried 150. Allen's response: "You're describing something that can't be built." An aircraft that large would be too heavy for any runway, too expensive to manufacture, too big for any gate. The fuel consumption would be astronomical. The engineering challenges were unsolvable. No airline could fill 400 seats consistently. It wasn't just ambitious, it was irrational. Trippe's counter: "Build it anyway. Pan Am will buy 25. Allen laid out the terms. Boeing wouldn't spend a single dollar on design unless Pan Am committed to purchasing the aircraft first. No prototype, no testing, no proof of concept. Sign the contract now or this conversation is over. Trippe signed. He committed Pan Am to purchasing 25 aircraft that existed only as a concept, using technology that hadn't been invented at a cost of $525 million. That was Pan Am's entire annual revenue. Not profit, revenue. If the aircraft couldn't fly, if Boeing couldn't deliver, if the design failed, Pan Am would go bankrupt. Trippe was betting 60 years of company history on a phone call. Boeing spent 3 years and $1 billion developing what they called the 747. The largest private investment in aviation history. 4 engines, 2 decks, 366 seats, triple the 707's capacity. The upper deck featured a full cocktail lounge with a piano bar. First class offered actual beds. Fully loaded, The thing weighed 735,000 pounds. Airports worldwide had to physically rebuild their gates. Ground crews had to be retrained. Fuel systems had to be redesigned. It was an engineering miracle that required reinventing infrastructure across 6 continents. January 22, 1970. Pan Am Flight 1 departs New York for London, carrying 324 passengers, the 747's maiden commercial voyage. It was perfect, spacious, quiet, smooth, everything Trippy promised. The 747 became an instant cultural icon. Every photograph of aviation, every movie scene in an airport, every image of modern travel featured the 747. It was the most recognizable aircraft ever built. Pan Am had, once again, done the impossible. And once again, they'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. Trippy ordered the 747 based on one assumption. Passenger growth would continue accelerating indefinitely. It didn't. Pan Am launched the 747 in 1970. The same year, America entered a recession. Passenger traffic didn't just slow, it reversed. It dropped 15% in 12 months. Pan Am's 747s crossed the Atlantic half empty, burning 5,000 gallons of fuel per flight. That was double the consumption of a 707. Every flight operated at a loss, every single one. Then 1973 hit. OPEC oil embargo. Fuel prices tripled in 6 months. Pan Am's annual fuel bill exploded from $150 million to $450 million. The 747, the aircraft that was supposed to print money for the next 20 years, became a financial millstone. The losses started mounting in 1973, first annual loss in 40 years, $48 million. 1974, $87 million. 1975, $88 million. 3 straight years of hemorrhaging cash. Pan Am was burning through their reserves at a rate nobody had seen before. But inside Pan Am's headquarters, there was no alarm, no panic, no sense of crisis. They'd survived the 1930s depression, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, oil shocks, currency crises, labor strikes. They'd survived everything for 4 decades. This was just another challenge. Pan Am was invincible. They genuinely believed that. They were wrong. What came next didn't just hurt Pan Am. It destroyed the foundation everything was built on. October 24, 1978. President Jimmy Carter signs the Airline Deregulation Act. With one signature, the entire structure of American aviation collapses. The law eliminated everything: government control over routes, government control over fares, government limits on competition. Any airline could now fly anywhere at any price. The free market had arrived. For 40 years, Pan Am had operated inside a fortress. The government approved their routes. The government set their prices. The government restricted their competition. Pan Am's international monopoly wasn't just a business advantage. It was guaranteed by federal law. Carter's signature erased it all. Within weeks, American Airlines announced transatlantic routes. Delta announced transatlantic routes. United announced transatlantic routes. Airlines that had never left the United States were suddenly competing for London, Paris, Frankfurt, Tokyo. Pan Am's protected kingdom became open warfare. And Pan Am had a structural flaw that was about to kill them. They had no domestic network. 0. Pan Am could fly you from New York to London, but they couldn't fly you from Chicago to New York. They could fly you from Los Angeles to Tokyo, but they couldn't fly you from Dallas to Los Angeles. Pan Am was purely international. For 50 years, this had been their strategy. Now it was a death sentence. Before deregulation, the system worked perfectly. United would fly passengers from Denver to New York. Pan Am would fly them from New York to London. 2 airlines, 1 ticket, shared revenue. Now, management spent more time fighting internal battles than serving customers. Within 24 months, Pan Am wrote off the entire acquisition. $437 million. Gone. Not diminished value, not partial loss, total loss. The bleeding became catastrophic. 1980, $219 million loss. 1981, $361 million loss. 1982, $485 million loss. Over $1 billion lost in 3 years. Pan Am was in financial freefall. They started selling everything they owned. 50 years of history sold to a competitor. Pan Am was dismembering itself, selling limbs to stay alive, and it still wasn't enough. The cost structure was unsustainable. Pan Am had 28,000 employees with an average fully loaded cost of $42,000 per employee. Annual labor cost, $1.2 billion. New competitors like People Express operated with labor costs of $28,000 per employee, 35% lower. Pan Am couldn't compete. They were flying the same planes on the same routes and losing money on every flight while competitors made profit. By 1988, Pan Am was barely functioning. Most valuable assets sold. Every route losing money. Reputation crumbling. Then December 21st, 1988 happened. Pan Am Flight 103, London to New York. A Boeing 747 named Clipper Maid of the Seas. At 7:03 p.m., 31,000 feet above Lockerbie, Scotland, a terrorist bomb exploded in the forward cargo hold. The aircraft disintegrated. 259 people on board killed instantly. 11 people on the ground in Lockerbie killed by falling debris. 270 total dead. The failures were systemic and inexcusable. The lawsuits came immediately. In 1992, a U.S. federal court found Pan Am guilty of willful misconduct in failing to prevent the bombing. Potential liability, $12 billion. More than Pan Am's entire market value. But the financial damage was nothing compared to the reputational destruction. Passengers stopped booking Pan Am flights. International travelers actively avoided them. The airline that once represented American excellence now represented American incompetence and danger. Pan Am wasn't wounded anymore. They were dying, and everyone could see it. Pan Am had flown to 86 countries across 6 continents. Now they operated Caribbean routes and some South American flights. The airline that pioneered global aviation was running a regional carrier. January 8, 1991. Pan Am filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy. $1.3 billion in debt. Negative $600 million in shareholder equity. The mathematics were brutal. Pan Am owed more than everything they owned was worth. They were technically insolvent. Legally dead. The most recognizable airline brand in human history? The company that had flown presidents and movie stars, that had connected continents, that had defined international travel for 2 generations, had become worthless. December 4th, 1991, midnight. Pan Am's board of directors held an emergency meeting in New York. The decision took 30 minutes. There was no buyer. There would be no buyer. It was over. At 12:30 a.m., they issued the order, cease all operations immediately. Pan Am Flight 436 was already airborne. Departed Barbados 11 p.m. the night before, bound for Miami. The crew had no idea they were operating the last flight in company history. The passengers were watching movies, sleeping, reading. Nobody knew. 1:43 a.m., December 4th, 1991. Flight 436 landed at Miami International Airport. The passengers deplaned, collected their luggage, walked through the terminal for the last time. American World Airways ceased to exist. There was no announcement, no final boarding call, no goodbye speech over the PA system. 64 years of aviation history ended at 1:43 in the morning while America slept. Families that had built their entire lives around Pan Am careers woke up with nothing. Shareholders, the people who'd invested in Pan Am stock, believing in the company's future, received zero. Their shares became worthless paper. The most iconic airline in aviation history was gone. Juan Tripa died on April 3, 1981. Heart failure. He was 81 years old, 10 years before Pan Am's collapse. He never saw the end of what he built. Some people say Pan Am should have been saved. that the US government should have bailed them out, that America needed a flag carrier, that Pan Am was too important to fail. But Pan Am paid the price for progress. They were sacrificed so everyone else could benefit from cheaper flights. And here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. America doesn't have a flag carrier anymore. No international airline represents the United States the way Emirates represents Dubai, or Singapore Airlines represents Singapore, or Cathay Pacific represents Hong Kong. We gave that up when Pan Am died. Was Pan Am's collapse inevitable? Or could it have been prevented? Should the government have bailed them out? Should they have been forced to merge with a domestic carrier earlier?